What if the most decisive turning point of the Ukraine war has just taken place, and almost no one in the West is paying attention? Right now, something historic is unfolding near Huliaipole. Russian forces have achieved a breakthrough of staggering scale, smashing through Ukrainian defenses in a way not witnessed since the earliest days of the invasion. This is no minor clash or isolated incident. It is a sweeping operational rupture, the kind that military analysts have warned could decide the fate of the conflict. Yet Western media is barely acknowledging it, or worse, glossing over its true significance. Why this silence? Is it simple ignorance, or does it reflect deeper anxieties about what is really at stake? This breakthrough is not an accident. It is the culmination of months of evolving tactics, relentless pressure, and a grinding psychological war that has sapped Ukraine's strength. The consequences are now reverberating far beyond the trenches, threatening not just the front lines, but the entire future of Eastern Europe. Missing this moment means missing the war's true turning point, a shift that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about Ukraine's chances, the regional balance of power, and the West's credibility. At risk is not just Ukraine's statehood, but also global security, the reputation of Western leaders, and the very fabric of the post-war order. So what actually happened near Huliaipole? Why does this breakthrough eclipse every battle that came before? And what does it expose about the real condition of Ukraine's war effort? Let's unravel, step by step, how this shockwave began, and why it could transform the conflict from this moment forward. To understand the true impact, we need to examine the events that led up to this breach, and the cracks that had already begun to show in Ukraine's defenses. No map or string of figures can truly convey the gravity of what has just unfolded. This is not merely a setback, but an unprecedented breach in Ukrainian defenses. Months of relative stability undone in a single, decisive stroke. Russian forces have smashed through several deeply layered Ukrainian defense lines, not in a narrow thrust, but across a front stretching between 15 and 25 kilometers. Their assault pushed up to 5 to 10 kilometers deep, an audacious maneuver unmatched since the chaotic early weeks of the war. To put this in perspective, in positional warfare, frontline shifts are usually measured in meters or, at most, a few hundred meters over weeks or even months of fighting. A breach of 5 to 10 kilometers in depth, across a front as wide as 15 to 25 kilometers, is almost unheard of in the context of modern, heavily fortified static warfare. This is the kind of maneuver seen in the Second World War during large-scale operations like Operation Bagration, when Soviet forces crushed German Army Group Center in a matter of weeks through deep penetrations and encirclements. In the Korean War, the Chinese offensive sometimes achieved breakthroughs of several kilometers, but rarely against such entrenched positions or with such speed. At the core of this rupture sits the village of Sladka. For months, it served as an outpost of Ukrainian resolve, its fortifications thought unbreakable. Yet, in only a few hours, Russian units stormed Sladka, bypassing strongpoints and pouring into the exposed terrain beyond. This is more than a tactical win. By smashing through and skirting the bastion at Sladka, Russian troops have carved a corridor into the Ukrainian rear. This opening is not simply a breach. It slices Ukrainian supply routes, putting vital logistics and evacuation lines under immediate threat or direct attack. With flanks now exposed and arteries severed, entire Ukrainian formations risk rapid encirclement. The pattern is hauntingly familiar. Isolated units cut off, repeating the catastrophic traps seen earlier in the conflict. A historical parallel worth recalling is the encirclement at Ilovaisk in 2014, during the early phase of the Donbas conflict. Then, Ukrainian volunteer battalions and regular troops were surrounded after a rapid Russian-backed offensive, leading to devastating casualties as they tried to break out. The same pattern now threatens to repeat on a much larger scale, only this time with better equipped, more experienced Russian units and a Ukrainian military already stretched thin. What makes this operation so alarming is its ruthless precision. Russian commanders have driven a wedge, a deep, calculated split, straight into the Ukrainian front. This wedge does not merely bend the lines, it cleaves them, trapping forces on both sides and threatening a collapse across a broad stretch of the front. To dismiss this as another routine episode would be a grave error. This breakthrough marks a pivot with far-reaching consequences. The possible collapse of Ukrainian defensive capability, a blow to Western credibility, and the looming risk of Ukraine's statehood unraveling before the world's eyes. But how could Russian forces achieve what seemed impossible against such hardened positions? The answer lies in the underlying weaknesses and the new tactics that made this disaster inevitable. To understand the anatomy of this collapse, we must dissect both the systemic failures and the innovations that shifted the balance. The story begins long before the first shells landed. This implosion was no accident. It was orchestrated, piece by piece, revealing a crisis both at the front and deep within the Ukrainian command. The trigger was a critical miscalculation by Ukrainian leadership. In a frantic effort to shore up another faltering sector, they withdrew their most seasoned, battle-tested units from Huliaipole. What remained were young conscripts, barely trained, uncertain, and ill-prepared for the storm that was about to break. Russian intelligence seized the moment. The instant these vulnerabilities appeared, Russian commanders acted with clinical precision, directing fresh assaults straight at the newly exposed seams. There was no pause, no second-guessing, just a swift, targeted offensive aimed exactly where Ukraine was weakest. But this was not the old blunt force approach. Russian tactics had transformed. Gone were the massed infantry and armor charges. Instead, agile assault teams, each about 12 to 15 men, moved like predators, every group equipped with first-person view drones for live reconnaissance, target acquisition, and psychological impact. These drones turned the battlefield into a chessboard where only one side could see the layout. All hours of the day and night, Russian quadcopters hovered, charting trenches, transmitting coordinates, and calling in precise strikes. Ukrainian troops felt naked under this mechanical gaze, exposed, powerless, always observed. The constant anxiety was as corrosive as any bombardment. Imagine being a Ukrainian soldier in a muddy trench, hearing the constant buzzing overhead, knowing that at any moment your position might be pinpointed for a mortar or drone-delivered grenade. It is a scenario reminiscent of the First World War, when artillery spotters could direct fire on any movement. But now, with drones, the coverage is total and real-time. There is no relief, no chance for concealment. Every attempt at resupply or evacuation becomes a gamble with death. Drone dominance meant round-the-clock surveillance. Every Ukrainian supply convoy, every troop rotation, every attempted evacuation, spotted, tracked, and often destroyed. Ukrainian logistics could not withstand the onslaught. Ammunition dumps erupted in fireballs, supply vehicles vanished in flashes, and vital communication hubs were snuffed out without warning. On the ground, the effect was catastrophic. Ukrainian units found themselves cut off, running dangerously low on food, water, and ammunition. Reinforcements could not break through. Medical evacuation became nearly impossible. Isolated and undersupplied, positions collapsed one after another as Russian spearheads surged forward. The psychological strain was overwhelming. Soldiers described feeling hunted, not merely fought. With no hope of relief, and the enemy's drones always overhead, morale fractured. Desertion soared. As many as several tens of thousands have abandoned their posts in recent months, fleeing a battle they believed was already lost. To draw another comparison, in the Second World War's Battle of France, once the German armored spearheads broke through at Sedan, French units behind the lines were swiftly encircled, cut off from communications and supply. Demoralization spread like wildfire. Similar psychological collapse is now observable in parts of the Ukrainian military. Reports from the ground speak of commanders unable to locate their units, soldiers refusing to advance, and field hospitals overwhelmed by the wounded with little prospect for evacuation. All these failures, leadership blunders, tactical stagnation, drone supremacy, shattered supply lines, and mass desertion, converged to produce a Ukrainian defense too brittle to withstand the Russian assault. The lines did not just bend, they snapped everywhere, all at once. Focusing on destroyed vehicles or dramatic headlines misses the deeper story. A systemic unraveling of morale, logistics, and command. These unseen battlefields, not just the visible ones, determine the fate of nations, and in Ukraine, they are being lost. As the Ukrainian defense crumbled, the scale of the disaster became apparent even to distant observers. The shockwaves from Huliaipole would soon ripple far beyond the battlefield. A single breach can spark a chain reaction. No one knows what will fall next, or if the entire front might simply dissolve before the world's eyes. At this moment, Ukrainian units flanking the Russian wedge confront an existential nightmare. Their supply lines have been cut, escape routes are evaporating, and every hour brings them closer to encirclement. What were once fortified positions now risk becoming death traps. Soldiers surrounded, isolated, facing overwhelming odds as Russian forces press in from all sides. Kiev faces a merciless decision. Should it throw its last reserves into the fray, launching desperate counterattacks in hopes of stemming the tide, at the risk of exhausting what little strength remains? Or should it order a retreat, abandoning both ground and men, accepting losses that may cripple the army for good? There are no good choices, only different shades of catastrophe. This dilemma is not just theoretical. In the Second World War, the Red Army repeatedly faced similar moments, such as at Stalingrad, where the choice was between holding ground at all costs or executing strategic withdrawals to preserve the core of the army. In the Korean War, United Nations forces withdrew in the face of Chinese offensives, trading territory for time. Each decision came at a steep price, both in lives and morale. The fallout spreads far beyond the battlefield. The sudden loss of this sector shakes the entire southern front. Cities like Zaporizhia, once insulated by multiple defensive belts, are left exposed. If the breach expands, it could unravel the broader defensive network, placing crucial infrastructure and millions of civilians within reach of advancing Russian units. Consider the potential humanitarian disaster. Should Russian forces reach major population centers, the mass displacement of civilians could surpass the waves seen in the opening months of the war. Urban combat, as witnessed in Mariupol or Bakhmut, brings devastation not just to soldiers, but to every resident, destroyed homes, shattered infrastructure, and long-term trauma. 3 paths lie ahead, none of them promising. First, Russia pushes forward, widens the breach, and encircles Ukrainian formations, forcing mass surrenders and accelerating territorial collapse. Second, Ukraine manages to stabilize the line, but only by throwing in precious reserves and equipment, weakening its defenses elsewhere. Third, the defense gives way entirely, triggering a chaotic retreat and risking the collapse of Ukraine's statehood itself. In every scenario, the initiative has slipped decisively away. Russia now sets the tempo, choosing when and where to strike next. Ukraine is left scrambling, forced to react, never able to dictate the fight or regain momentum. This is no accident. The breakthrough is not a mere tactical mishap, but the culmination of months of relentless attrition. Western-supplied doctrines and advanced weaponry, once hailed as game-changers, have been worn down, depleted, or proven ill-suited for this unforgiving battlefield. The much-touted technological edge has failed to deliver under sustained Russian pressure. Meanwhile, Russian forces have adapted with ruthless efficiency. Relying on robust, simple systems and flexible tactics, they have neutralized Ukraine's technological advantages. Swarms of drones, nimble assault groups, and constant artillery barrages have shattered fixed defenses, proving that adaptability, not just firepower, determines victory. The stakes now reach their zenith. If this chain reaction continues, Ukraine risks not merely losing ground, but forfeiting its very capacity to defend itself as a sovereign state. For Western nations, the danger is just as acute. Credibility, influence, and the entire post-war order hang in the balance, threatened by the prospect of irreversible defeat. Yet this is only the beginning. As the consequences of the breach ripple outward, each side must confront new dilemmas, and make choices that will shape the fate of the war. Wars are not won by technology alone. They are won by the cohesion of a system and the will of those who fight. The collapse of Ukrainian defenses near Huliaipole is not simply a story of better weapons or sharper tactics. It is a warning. In modern war, the spirit and adaptability of a nation outweigh any single technological edge. Ukraine's military, shaped by NATO doctrines and increasingly dependent on imported technology, was not prepared for a war of such total attrition. Their model emphasized precision tools and static lines. But the enemy was relentless and adaptive, pushing Ukraine's defenses past the breaking point. The belief that smarter drones or Western hardware could cover for deeper flaws proved tragically wrong. Russian forces blended old and new methods with ruthless efficiency. They deployed waves of small mobile assault groups, all supported by swarms of drones. The illusion of static safety shattered. Decentralized Russian units moved quickly, bypassing strong points and using real-time intelligence to strike at Ukraine's lifelines. Each Russian victory, on the ground or in the air, tightened the noose, cutting supplies and crippling any hope of a Ukrainian regrouping. Yet the most decisive factor was not material, it was morale. When supply lines fail, casualties rise, and exhaustion sets in, only unity and belief can hold an army together. In recent weeks, Ukrainian units have begun to fray. Fatigue and disintegration are spreading. Without a shared conviction in victory, even the strongest fortifications become little more than obstacles. Russia's ability to shift reserves and exploit openings stands in stark contrast to Ukraine's mounting exhaustion. The Russian command has learned and adapted, striking wherever weakness appeared. Ukrainian forces, meanwhile, have been stretched thin, under-resourced, and, most dangerously, losing faith in their cause. This unraveling was hastened by the withdrawal of Western support. European and American political resolve is fading. Promised arms and funds now arrive late, or sometimes not at all. The signal is clear, to both armies and to the watching world. Momentum has shifted. Ukrainian soldiers and the society behind them feel this sense of abandonment. Their morale erodes. The will to fight weakens. The shock of the Russian breakthrough is spreading through Ukrainian society. This is more than a loss of territory. It is a loss of initiative, of hope, and, increasingly, the sense that what is happening cannot be reversed. As Ukraine loses the ability to mobilize, to replace losses and inspire new volunteers, the threat grows beyond military defeat. The very fabric of Ukrainian statehood begins to unravel. The lesson is harsh and unambiguous. No quantity of foreign aid, no arsenal of advanced technology, no wave of positive media coverage can replace cohesion, morale, and a resilient system. Ignoring these truths risks repeating the same mistakes, at the cost of countless lives, billions in lost aid, and the future of an entire region. With Ukraine reeling and Western support wavering, the strategic map of Eastern Europe is being redrawn in real time. The world now faces consequences that reach far beyond the battlefield. The battle unfolding near Huliaipole is not merely another entry on the war's shifting front lines. It is the harbinger of a new era. The world stands at a precipice, witnessing history as it happens. Are you prepared for the consequences that follow? This is a crossroads moment. The ground beneath Ukraine's defenders is not just contested, it is rapidly eroding. The Russian breakthrough in the Huliaipole sector is not an isolated incident. It is the product of months of mounting pressure, strategic missteps, and cumulative exhaustion. To overlook this reality is to risk being consumed by history's relentless tide. At stake is more than the shape of a front line. What is breaking here is not only a defensive perimeter, but the very narrative that has sustained hope. For months, Western officials and media have insisted on the myth of a static stalemate, a resilient Ukrainian shield. Today, that facade is crumbling. The Ukrainian military, depleted by attrition and starved of essential supplies, stands on the brink of collapse. To minimize or ignore these events is not just a miscalculation, it is a wager with fate itself. The consequences are enormous. Should Ukraine's eastern defenses unravel, the shockwaves will reach far beyond the battlefield. The strategic credibility the West has built over generations is at grave risk. Policymakers who bet their careers and their nation's futures on unwavering Ukrainian resistance may find themselves discredited and isolated, both at home and abroad. For Ukraine, the danger is existential. Losing key defensive positions means more than lost land. It threatens the unity and survival of the state. With every kilometer lost, logistics fracture, morale falters, and the looming threat of encirclement grows. The chance to stabilize the front recedes, and the specter of Ukraine's dissolution becomes more tangible. Let us consider 3 practical steps that could, in theory, be taken to remediate the situation, though each comes with severe risks and complications. First, Ukraine could attempt a rapid mobilization and redeployment of reserves from quieter sectors. This would involve moving units from western Ukraine, or even from the northern border regions, and rushing them via rail and road to the Huliaipole front. However, this approach carries the danger of weakening defenses elsewhere, potentially opening new vulnerabilities to Russian attack. Historically, such emergency redeployments have worked only when executed with utmost speed and secrecy, a luxury Ukraine may no longer have. Second, Ukraine could appeal to Western allies for an emergency surge of weaponry, ammunition, and financial aid. In the past, such as during the 2022 defense of Kiev, rapid Western support played a decisive role. Yet, with current political divisions in both Europe and the United States, and with existing stockpiles running low, this option may be limited. Additionally, logistics chains have grown more vulnerable as Russian strikes intensify. Third, Ukraine could attempt to negotiate a temporary operational pause or localized ceasefire in this sector, buying time to reconstitute shattered units and reinforce defenses. This approach, used in other conflicts such as the Iran-Iraq War, can provide brief respite, but often at the cost of political concessions or loss of morale. There is also no guarantee Russia would honor such a pause if it sensed imminent victory. For Europe, a collapsing Ukraine presents a threat not seen since the Balkan Wars of the 1990s, when the destabilization of Yugoslavia triggered waves of refugees, ethnic violence, and regional insecurity. The collapse of a nation at the doorstep of the European Union would send shockwaves through security, economics, and politics, echoing far beyond the immediate war zone. Markets, already rattled by energy uncertainty and inflation, must now brace for further shocks as the balance of power tilts. The price of denial will be paid not only in territory, but in diminished credibility and the unraveling of the post-war order. Looking forward, the world must prepare for several possible scenarios. If Ukraine's defenses continue to unravel, the region could see mass surrenders, the collapse of regular military command, and the emergence of guerrilla warfare in occupied areas. Alternatively, a frozen conflict could emerge, with shifting front lines and persistent instability, much like the situation in eastern Ukraine after 2014 or in Transnistria after the early 1990s. The challenge now is not whether to brace for the impact, but how to respond to a changed world. Will leaders and citizens confront the stark new reality, or will they turn away and let history deliver its verdict? The burden of choice and its consequences falls to us all. As we stand at this crossroads, it is crucial to remember that wars are not only contests of arms, but also battles of will, adaptability, and vision. The events near Huliaipole are a stark reminder that no military, no matter how well equipped, is immune to exhaustion, error, and the corrosive effects of lost hope. To those watching this unfold from the safety of distant capitals, the lesson is clear. Ignoring the warning signs, minimizing setbacks, or relying on outdated narratives only increases the cost of future decisions. The fate of Ukraine, and by extension the stability of Europe, now hangs in a delicate balance. It is a moment for clear-eyed assessment, honest debate, and decisive action, not denial. As history has shown time and time again, from the fall of France in 1940 to the collapse of South Vietnam in 1975, once the momentum of defeat sets in, it can become unstoppable. The choice is whether to meet this moment with resolve or to let the tide of events sweep away decades of hard-won peace and stability. The world is watching. The outcome will shape not only Ukraine's future, but also the credibility of the West, the security of Europe, and the norms that have governed the post-war order. The question remains: are we prepared to face the consequences, or will we look back in regret, wondering when the turning point was missed? This is the debt of the present moment, the question left open by every battle, every decision, every silence. In the shadow of Huliaipole, the answer is being written, day by day, in blood and in history. Will the world heed the warning, adapt, and act? Or will it once again be caught by surprise, paying the price for denial in a currency far more costly than any could have imagined? The choice and the debt are now ours to resolve.